The author George Orwell once said, "If liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear." His words feel just as relevant today as they did then. We regularly hear stories of cancel culture and speakers being no-platformed. Others claim that views which are offensive have no place in society today. But why is freedom of speech so important? Should there be restrictions? And if so, what should they be? And how should we think about it as Christians? You won't find the term freedom of speech in the Bible, but what wisdom would Jesus have for us about how we use our words? The freedom to speak has often been contested. In fact, the Bible seems to assume that as Christians, we might not have freedom of speech at all. Jesus expected the values of his kingdom to clash with the values of the world. If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first, he said. That was a challenge which the early Christians faced. Nearly 2,000 years ago, Peter and John were hauled in front of the Sanhedrin and ordered not to speak or teach in the name of Jesus. But they replied, "Which is right in God's eyes, to listen to you or to him? You be the judges. As for us, we cannot help speaking about what we have seen and heard." And of course, for many people in the world today, that is the situation in which they find themselves. In some countries, it is illegal to be a Christian, or it is heavily suppressed. Places like North Korea or Somalia, Yemen or parts of Nigeria. And it's not just Christian faith or other religious beliefs which can be banned. Autocratic regimes censor foreign media. Dictatorships silence contrary viewpoints and imprison opponents. Even peaceful marches can be brutally suppressed. The Ugandan dictator Idi Amin once warned, "There is freedom of speech, but I cannot guarantee freedom after speech." Those are not the challenges we have here in the UK. Freedom of speech is guaranteed in Britain by Article 10 of the European Convention of Human Rights. There do remain some limits to that, such as around libel or inciting violence, and we would support those limits. But by law, we are able to criticise governments and philosophies and religions here in the UK. However, at the same time, in recent years, we've also seen growing concern around the right to free speech being eroded, particularly when it conflicts with rights of other groups. Commentators on sexuality or gender claim they have been cancelled. People have been arrested for praying within abortion buffer zones. There are consultations over whether the UK should introduce a law around Islamophobia, prompting fears of what could be a blasphemy law in all but name. And it's a particularly contentious subject at universities. A couple of years ago, students at Christ Church College, Oxford responded to a speaking invitation that the Oxford Union had offered to a gender-critical philosopher who had expressed concerns around biological males in women's spaces. They said this: "Transphobes should not feel welcome in Oxford or in this college." The government has since created a new position of Director for Freedom of Speech and Academic Freedom at the Office for Students to combat the growing threat to free speech at universities. And universities are at risk of fines if they do not comply. But what wisdom can we take from the Bible around how we use our words? Here are 3 helpful principles. 1. Speech is a good gift from God. 2. Freedom of speech should be equal for all. And 3. having freedom to speak doesn't mean we should abuse it. Speech is a good gift from God. As humans, we are made in the image of a speaking God. The Bible begins with God speaking creation into existence. God speaks with the first humans, Adam and Eve. Unlike the animals, God has created us to be able to communicate with one another, to give words meaning, to develop language. When Jesus met people who were unable to speak, he gave them their voice, quite literally. In Mark, he encountered someone who was mute. Jesus looked up to heaven and with a deep sigh said to him, "Ephphatha," which means be opened. At this, the man's ears were opened, his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly. Speech is a good thing, and God does not want anyone to be without a voice. He calls his followers to be a voice for the voiceless and to speak on behalf of the powerless. At Care, we often come back to Proverbs 31:8. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy. We want to speak on behalf of the voiceless. And really, we don't want there to be a voiceless at all. Freedom of speech has to be equal for everyone. Winston Churchill once said, "Everyone is in favour of free speech. Hardly a day passes without its being extolled. But some people's idea of it is that they are free to say what they like, but if anyone says anything back, that is an outrage." As Christians, one of the reasons we so value freedom of speech is we have a gospel message to proclaim, a message of salvation. Paul writes in Romans, "How can they believe in the one of whom they have not heard?" But we also believe in loving our neighbour as ourselves. The freedoms which we want for ourselves should apply to others as well. The Christian message is countercultural. Some will find it offensive, particularly when it comes to topics like sexuality, gender, life issues. Even the concept of sin can be controversial for people who might find it judgmental. But if we want freedom of speech for ourselves, we have to advocate for it for those we disagree with as well. The freedom to criticise another religion or a different worldview means that someone has the right to criticise what we believe too, even if we find it offensive. The gay rights activist Peter Tatchell, who we would disagree with on all sorts of issues, spoke wisely when he said, "Many of the most important ideas in human history, such as those of Galileo Galilei, Karl Marx, Charles Darwin, Sigmund Freud, caused great offence in their time. There is no right to not be offended." And freedom of speech should not be abused. The freedom to speak also entails the freedom not to speak. The comedian Ricky Gervais once said, "Free speech is one of the most important things to me, but I think it gets confusing when it comes to offence. Because for one, just because you have the right to say anything, it doesn't mean you have to." As Christians, we are called to speak in a particular way, with both truth and grace, like Jesus himself modelled. Our speech is designed to be for the good of others, not cruel or malicious or tearing people down. That doesn't mean that it doesn't ever criticise or challenge, but in everything, our motive is to work for the good of the person on the receiving end. Paul writes in Colossians 4, "Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone." We know we are to be the salt of the earth, being distinct from the world around us. But we also want to be full of grace, not speaking down to other people or shouting at them, but addressing them respectfully as fellow human beings made in the image of God Himself. And above all, we can do that by being rooted in the gospel message, that message of grace, recognizing that once we were not unlike any non-Christians we speak to, but we have only been saved by God's grace to us. At CARE, we do believe in free speech. We believe that everyone has worth and value and a voice which should be heard. But in everything we say and do, let us look to imitate Jesus, the one who came from the Father, full of grace and truth, and who committed no sin and no deceit was found in His mouth.